Greetings, everyone. My name is Brian Fonseca. I'm director of FIU's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. I'll serve as your MC for the day. It's an absolute honor to welcome you all to FIU's 5th Annual Hemispheric Security Conference. In the midst of a serious and deadly global pandemic, we saw an opportunity to truly make this a hemispheric-wide security conference. And so we migrated to the virtual platform and built in multi-language capability to make it as accessible as possible. Hopefully all of you have received the proper instructions to change language. As of this morning, we had over 1,400 joining us from more than 30 countries around the world. So a true testament to the reach of the program. On behalf of the Institute, as well as the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, I want to give a quick shout out to our collaborators, Southcom, the William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, the OAS, Council of the Americas, the Wilson Center, the Carter Center, CREES, Universidad de La Plata in Argentina, the Global Health Consortium, and FIU's Robert Stemple College for Public Health and Social Work. We're grateful for their partnership. Now it is my honor to introduce my boss and the founding dean of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, Dr. John Stack.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm John Stack, the founding dean of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. In this unique and challenging time, it is my pleasure to be here with you all virtually for this important event. Each year, our Hemispheric Security Conference is one of the top gatherings for leading minds in the hemisphere and security matters. This year is no different. We are honored to have with us this week the former president of Chile and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. In just a few moments, you will hear from the commander of the U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Craig Fowler. Ambassador Jean Maines, who is the civilian deputy to the commander, is here along with Ambassador Robert Gelbard, who is a member of the Green School Advisory Council. I want to offer a special thanks to you, to everyone from Southcom who are joining us today. We have a tremendous partnership. We have an extensive partnership, and we hope to contribute to this partnership for years to come. We are proud to have with us today President Luis Guillermo Solis, the former president of Costa Rica, a member of our distinguished faculty, and the incoming director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. Thank you, President Solis, for all that you do for FIU and the Green School. And welcome to all the other distinguished leaders and guests who have gathered with us from around the region. This week, we will discuss some of the most pressing security issues affecting the hemisphere, from the impact of the current global pandemic on security to strategies for ending the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. We will hear about the evolving role of military institutions as well as the role of women in peace and security. And we will discuss the latest security trends from around the Caribbean and Central America. Even more than ever, it is critical that we deepen our understanding of the evolving and complex political and security environments in this hemisphere and its impact on citizens of the region. At the Green School, we are proud to encourage a dialogue dedicated to advancing security and stability. Before we begin, I want to take a special moment to recognize Frank Mora, director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, and Brian Fonseca, director of the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. Along with their teams, these two remarkable individuals have done a tremendous job organizing this conference in a challenging environment. For the first time, the conference will be held over 5 days and streamed live in 3 languages. Your efforts are evident by the number of participants that we have online with us today, so thank you to both of you. Without further ado, it is my great privilege to introduce the 5th president of Florida International University, Dr. Mark B. Rosenberg.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Dean Stack. Welcome to RFIU. Welcome to this Hemispheric Symposium. Muy bienvenidos a todos ustedes. Nos complace tenerlos acá con nosotros. Agradecemos mucho, digamos, todos los copatrocinadores de este suceso, un suceso que ha recibido el liderazgo de Brian Fonseca, tanto él como Frank Mora. And I want to thank Frank Mora in particular for all of his leadership at the Latin American and Caribbean Center in our Green School over the years. Frank, thank you so much. We've appreciated you. We've benefited from your leadership and your vision for humanity and for the hemisphere. Thank you so much. And much of that is going to come out in our proceedings today. I want to welcome as well the former president of Costa Rica, Luis Guillermo Solis, the former president of Chile, Michelle Bachelet. Thank Admiral Fowler for his partnership and his thoughtfulness, Ambassador Jean Maines and Ambassador Bob Gelbart, who's been a friend for over nearly 3 decades. I do want to thank you all for joining us this morning. Look, the reality is, while this COVID-19 has altered how we do things, we're still going to do those things. And it's critical for us here at FIU in Miami that we continue to maintain our focus and our passion on the region, on the hemisphere. This event is now a landmark gathering when it comes to the analysis of security issues in the hemisphere. And obviously, while we'd rather have these conversations in person, we now have an opportunity to reach a much larger group and to have a much larger engagement. And that's really why this institution was created in the first place. So it's a significant accomplishment, and we're really proud that in this month of May, we can continue to be relevant to the most important issues related to hemispheric security. We're committed to continuing our engagement with Latin America. It's part of our DNA, a founding principle to foster hemispheric dialogue and cooperation. We understand as well that security issues are critical during these troublesome times, and that's why this conference gives us a unique opportunity to address these critical issues. We understand that in South Florida, our demography and our geography is our destiny. We invite you to stay connected to us. We have an incredible online education capability, online.fiu.edu. The Green School is one of the top-ranked schools of hemispheric and global affairs in the world, and I want to thank their faculty. And we're very proud of the partnership that we have with the U.S. Southern Command. You see, partnerships make the world go round, and this partnership is really, really helpful to our students, to our ability to speak truth to power, and to our ability to share the great information that we can generate working in partnership with you. This pandemic is global. And at FIU and in our South Florida, we are trying to move from day one, what I call day one, to day two. But the reality is we can't move to day two unless our neighbors, you, can get out of day one. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that we have information that's available to our partners. And we've created impactocovid.fiu.edu with all kinds of resources for guidance and support. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about this. So I hope you all enjoy our conference. Thank you always for being engaged in productive dialogues to ensure the prosperity of the hemisphere, to ensure the stability of the hemisphere, and ultimately the peace of all peoples. Thank you very much. looking forward to a great conference. Now back to Brian.
Thanks, President Rosenberg. It is now my absolute honor to introduce a friend, a mentor, definitely a luminary in our field, Dr. Frank Mora. Dr. Mora is currently director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, and will forever be a professor at Florida International University, even beyond his post at LAC. As many of you know, prior to arriving at FIU, Dr. Mora served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Western Hemisphere. That was from 2009 to 2013. And previous to that, he held several teaching positions, including Professor of National Security Studies or National Security Strategy and Latin American Studies at the National War College, National Defense University, and an Associate Professor and Chair in the Department of International Studies at Rhodes College. So without further ado, again, my honor to kick it over to Dr. Frank Mora.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate the intro and the partnership. I have to say that our teams put in a lot of work to put this very challenging but a very important virtual conference over the next week. So thank you for the partnership, and thank you for the Dean and the President for their kind words. Good morning to everyone. It is an honor here to start this conference with the Commander of U.S. Southcom, Admiral Craig Fowler. Admiral, how are you doing? How are we doing? Thank you for being with us.
I'm good. It's good to see you all. Good morning, Dr. Frank.
Let me, I'll introduce here Admiral in a sec, just to tell you how we're going to approach this. We got about 45 minutes with the Admiral, so he's going to take a little time to make some initial remarks. Then he and I will have a conversation for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to that audience, that very large audience that we have from throughout the Americas, to ask questions, Q&A. You will find a Q&A box. So later I will remind folks to send in your questions for the Admiral. And I imagine we're going to get hundreds of questions, Admiral, so I'll try to do my best to consolidate and filter and get those to you in the time that we have allotted, and then we'll end with Admiral Fowler giving some final remarks. Once again, Admiral, thank you for being with us. As many of you know, Admiral Fowler has been Commander at U.S. Southcom since November of 2018. Just prior to that, he served as Senior Military Assistant to then Secretary Mattis. Throughout his career since graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy, Admiral Fowler has had some very important, critical staff and command position, both at sea and ashore. Too many to describe here, but we are very honored to have him not just in this conference today and start us this week, but to, as the President said, partnering with us at FIU, working closely with us, and it's been really a great pleasure. I want to thank you for that, Admiral. So, Admiral, why don't I turn over the mic to you for the next few minutes to give you some initial remarks before we get to a conversation.
Okay, thanks, and good to see you, Frank. I guess this is the next best thing to being on stage with you. Also, President Mark Rosenberg. Mark, good to see you as well. I have seen you on TV a couple times, but this is the next best thing. And Dean John Stack, good morning, and thank you. Thanks for your passion. It just comes through when you talked about how we're getting after this day one, day two, and the partnership. So the two P's there's a lot of power there, and it infuses us with energy here at Southcom, and our partnership with FIU has caused us to think more broadly and challenge our thinking, and really deeply examine all the opportunity this hemisphere presents. So Frank, to take it back a year ago, we're on the same stage. We had just published our new strategy, and within days, that was really the basis for my talk. We shook hands. I think we set up, I was looking at the film, I think it was about 8 feet apart, but wouldn't have known that there would be something to that distance. It was probably just physical dimensions. Got to meet Mark and John, and great questions, interaction with the students and media and the other really smart people that were there. It was really inspiring. And nowhere in the strategy or in our talk did we talk about a global pandemic that would pose a new threat to economics, to security, to stability. And so it does reinforce the importance of academic institutions, of forums like this, where we think deeply and challenge our thinking about the future and what we think and believe about that future and our approaches to that future. It just reinforces that in so many ways and so many dimensions. So a year ago, we put this strategy in place, and we moved out working diligently with our partners in the US government, and importantly with our allies and partners in the region. This strategy, an enduring promise to the hemisphere, it represents the long game. It represents that the US, the United States and Southern Command have been strong partners, the partner of choice of Latin America and the Caribbean for decades, and we're going to maintain that trajectory into the future. It talks about the value of partnerships, strong partnerships, and partnerships are mutual. What benefits the partner also benefits this partner, the United States. And it's a bilateral relationship, but also multilateral forums, which we have here, and you mentioned a number of them at the beginning, all of you that are participating in this conference. Strong partnerships grounded in democracy are the best way to counter threats and ensure the future. The National Defense Strategy was published in 2018 for the United States. It talks about competition, it talks about expanding the competitive space globally. It talks about the economic importance of that competition, and it talks about the importance of freedom and security. In that National Defense Strategy, it recognizes there are challenges to that competition. And foremost to that, it talks about great power competition, the emergence of Russia and China as competitors. Our strategy mirrors that, nests right in with that. And our strategy focuses first and foremost on us as Southcom. You gotta be the best team on the field if you're gonna be a trusted partner. So we focus on building our team. We focus on being ready, being trusted, being collaborative, and then we focus on the output of that strategy. What we want to achieve is a secure, free, and prosperous hemisphere. Think about three legs of a stool. They've got to be balanced. We need prosperity to have security, but in a situation of insecurity, there's not going to be a lot of room for prosperity. And then resident throughout is freedom, democracy. So why, if I just want to convey one theme today, is why does this hemisphere matter? Why is there such importance to having a strategy, following a strategy, and moving out with a sense of urgency to work the strategy so that we make improvements today and into tomorrow? I'd say two points as to why this hemisphere matters so much to the United States and to our partners that are participating today, our partner nations. We are a neighborhood. When we think of a neighborhood, we think of common values, we think of common cultures, we think of the connection we deeply have. I think of my own wife, whose family's from Brazil, and there's so many stories and connections like that throughout the United States and here in South Florida in particular. All the things that a neighborhood brings, and the close proximity, the positional aspects of being a neighborhood. We're connected in all the domains. We talk about domains in warfighting, air, land, sea, space, and cyber. We're connected. We're connected to, like no other region of the world, this neighborhood of ours. We're also a democratic hemisphere, for the most part. Some glaring exceptions, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. But for the most part, it's a democratic hemisphere that loves freedom, that one of those three legs of that stool. And that matters. Democracy matters. That's the long-term advantage that we have working together as partners. So why it matters? It's a neighborhood, and we're, for the most part, like-minded democracies. Think of that neighborhood as a circle, a virtuous circle, if you will. And circles are good. Many things in our lives that are good, wedding bands, circles are strong, they're connected. And what our strategy aims to do is to strengthen that circle, strengthen that neighborhood, economically and security-wise as a basis for that strength. Unfortunately, that circle is that virtuous circle is under attack from what I would characterize as a vicious circle of threats, and they're connected here in this hemisphere. So while we are democracies, for the most part, they're young, and in some cases, the emerging institutions are weak and they need help. And that's one of the focuses of our strategy is on institution building, working on the professionalism of a Department of Defense, our counterparts. So this vicious circle starts with young democracies and young institutions. Corruption is a national security threat that preys on these young institutions and often points them in a direction counter to democracy. Transnational criminal organizations, which are a $90 billion a year enterprise in this hemisphere that traffic in drugs, people, arms, anything that gives them an advantage, and actually control territory throughout Central America and into South America, are a threat to the virtuous circle. And these transnational criminal organizations thrive on corruption. They thrive on bribes and money laundering and all the things that weakens institutions and weakens democracy. And then unfortunately, to the world we live in, we have other malign actors, external actors, Russia, Iran, and to some extent China, that don't value democracy, that are trying to impose their version of world order on the hemisphere, and that thrive on corruption as well, and connect into this vicious circle of threats. Iran, you have to ask yourself, what interest does Iran have in Venezuela? Well, we've seen recent indications of Iranian military and state support in Venezuela. And then there's the malign actors that are resident to the hemisphere, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. I would say that right now, all things that focus this vicious circle come to rest in Venezuela, where we have Cuba and Russia propping up an illegitimate Maduro regime, and then the impacts of institutions that are not professional, that are corrupt inside Venezuela, spurring nearly 5 million migrants forward into the hemisphere, and where COVID has impacted all of us and has impacted the economic and food security. It's hard to understand what COVID has impacted in Venezuela, since we know that Maduro has issued orders to intentionally lie about it. And that's concerning because it provides an incubation point for future instability. So we have our neighborhood. That's why this hemisphere matters so much. It is democratic. We want to make it, strengthen it, secure, free, prosperous, but it's under attack, and under attack from a number of these threats that I laid out. Our strategy focuses on these partners. I think of it as building blocks of a neighborhood. Now, a strategy is a bridge. It gets you from where we are today to where we want to be, even more secure, more prosperous and free. And along that lanes of those bridges, we focus on our partners, and we focus on the things that partners want: institution building, exercises, our exercise program, humanitarian assistance, school education is one of our key things that we do every year, with about $11 million investment in professional education for our partner nations. Those fundamental building blocks set us up for strategic success. We're here for the long haul. We're a committed partner. COVID is a threat that we'll have to deal with, and we're working that into every aspect of our program. We've not retreated from the field. In fact, we're pushing forward. COVID has allowed us to, just like we're doing today, virtually exercise all of our capabilities to connect with our partners. And there's rarely a day goes by that myself or a member of my team is not on the phone or on a media like this with a chief of defense, a security minister, a minister of defense from one of our partner nations, talking about partner nation needs and how we could partner with those with our Latin American, Caribbean partners to meet their current need. I just point out that I just ran the numbers this morning. U.S. government assistance to Latin America and the Caribbean since the onset of COVID now tops $65 million. USAID and Southcom, and we are the largest single contributor to COVID response globally to Latin America and the Caribbean, despite what media reports might say otherwise, and we're doing it in a transparent manner that respects human rights, respects democracy, respects the rule of law, and respects sovereignty. We're doing it in a manner that plays for the long game. We're doing it in a manner that reinforces this neighborhood concept and reinforces the importance of this hemisphere for the future. Frank, I'm gonna end there. There's a lot more to say. I'm sure the questions and your expert guidance will steer us that way. It's great to be here this morning and have an opportunity to talk about something I'm equally passionate about, this hemisphere.
Well, thank you so much, Admiral. Appreciate your leadership. We're already getting questions from the audience, but let me ask a few of my own first. So you mentioned the COVID response and what Southcom is doing. I was wondering if you could drill down a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about how we are exactly supporting, from a Southcom perspective, how are we supporting our partners in the region?
So we have a robust partnership in the region through our embassy teams, our senior defense officials, each one of our embassies. We've never left a playing field in that respect. So close collaboration with our ambassadors, our chargés, and our senior defense officials. These are colonels, Navy captains, lieutenant colonels that are meeting with partner nation chiefs of defense and ministers to ascertain what they need. We have authority to rapidly program humanitarian assistance. Things as basic, Dr. Mora, as cleaning supplies, things that are locally purchased in the country that would not have an impact on the availability or supply here in the United States. And we've approved close to 90 projects of that nature, about $1.5 million in rapid response. We turn around those projects in a matter of days here, working with our embassies. And then I connect with the chiefs of defense, security ministers, or commissioners in the case of some of the Caribbean countries. So USAIDs come in with bigger programs, and USAID, and they're working through the embassies, and they're scaling to a bigger audience with their programs. So, but it's generally what's in the mutual benefit of both the nation that we're partnering with and the U.S., right? So if we all care deeply about this neighborhood, we want to see less transnational criminal normalization. We want to see less migration that is influenced by food insecurity, lack of jobs, or local insecurity because of narco-traffickers, narco-terrorism, or those other factors. And we know that the COVID environment has the potential to accelerate those insecurity trends. So we're trying to get ahead of it. Look, the world didn't see any of this coming, so we're all working from a position of trying to catch up, but we're trying to rapidly get ahead of this with some focused response.
Thank you, Admiral. Last time we actually shared a stage together at the FIU, I asked you a question. I'm going to ask you the same question again, because that was prior to COVID. You had participated in a special issue of Militaries in Latin America that was presented by, published by America's Quarterly. That was before COVID. The question I asked then, and now, because now it's in the context of COVID, is what's your reaction to the sort of increasing role missions that Latin American militaries are taking on? That was true prior to COVID in the fall of last year. We saw that response to social protests, and now we're seeing really across the region militaries even assuming a larger role in response to this pandemic. What's your reaction to this growing role of Latin American militaries in non-traditional missions?
Right. So I just start by looking at the United States. So in any democracy, the militaries play a role in the security of the nation. So here in the United States, our role is principally an outward role, looking at security to the homeland. But when times are tough and the mission dictates, the U.S. Military gets remission to support the internal roles, and laws govern that. We've seen that now with United States Northern Command, my counterpart that works Mexico, Bahamas, Canada, and the U.S. being the lead agency for the military's response. So a lot of guard support, a lot of medical support here in the United States. In our partner nations, a lot of their laws mirror our law, where the military, in terms of domestic, would be in support, and the president, through working through their democratic institutions, has the authority to call that up. And so in talking with my counterparts, many of the militaries are highly involved in medical response, because they have very capable medical forces like our own, highly involved in traffic control and crowd control and routing, and helping to ensure that there's physical distancing guidelines, and in the internal security with respect to ensuring that the criminal organizations don't take advantage of the situation. Now, anytime you have that, you have concerns that the military security institutions in general, but military in specific, would overreach and lose their legitimacy by crossing a red line with respect to human rights. We're watching that really closely, Frank. The most important thing a military can do is it has to maintain its legitimacy with the population. It does in peace or war, and you lose that legitimacy, you're on a path to losing the war. You might win the tactical battle, but you're going to lose overall. And so we've got to maintain that legitimacy. Our own U.S. forces, we focus on that through our own training and professionalism. And we focus that in our partnership and capacity building with our partner nations. So we focus on professionalism, and an element of that is human rights. And so that's really what we're concerned about as we watch this. We know that the insecurity in general can drive a response that might trip over a line with respect to human rights. So we're watching that very, very closely, and we have those conversations with our partners.
Great, thank you, Admiral. So just combine two issues here on your reference to malign influence, particularly China and COVID. What is Southcom doing to combat Chinese malign influence activities, particularly maybe in the Caribbean? You know, China is currently using medical diplomacy, providing masks, PPE, et cetera, COVID test kits to win favor, right? Using soft power from a military standpoint, favor from the Caribbean governments. How do you respond to that kind of challenge?
The best way to respond to any challenge is to be the best team you can be. And I don't want to sound too trite with that, but for us to maintain our position as a partner of choice in the hemisphere, we focus on our professionalism. We focus on our speed of response. We focus on what we can bring to our partners. And as I highlighted during my opening remarks, overall, the U.S. government response far and away exceeds any response of any other nation. We haven't been as vocal as highlighting that, but it is important that we do. And it is important that we focus more on what we can bring to the partnerships and what we can bring to security and stability that will lead to prosperity as we recover from the COVID day one, as was illuminated so well at the beginning by President Rosenberg. It's important that we focus on that, focus on delivering a mutual benefit, and that's what we're doing. So we're focused more on what we're delivering than what China might be delivering. Now, we have our eye on that, and we are, where we see China misrepresenting the facts, we don't hesitate to inform our partners of that. More broadly, we have to look at the trends globally of what China is up to with its One Belt, One Road, with its focus on debt diplomacy, with its focus on ensuring that Chinese positional advantage is gained at the expense of the things that we hold dear in our neighborhood: democracy, human rights, rule of law, and sovereignty. So the broader concerns relate back to what we see as China's competition and the way China approaches competition globally. China's trying to rewrite the world order that has caused this hemisphere to prosper and the world to prosper since the end of World War II. They're trying to write it in a way that doesn't respect those tenets of democracy that I laid out.
So, Admiral, in your remarks, you made reference to Iran and Venezuela. I should say that we have now 30 questions, and a number of them are about the tankers, oil tankers that are coming to Venezuela. And all the audience is just trying to get your reaction. Do you think this could lead to some kind of confrontation, especially when Iran seems to suggest that they would not allow the United States to in any way interfere with their tankers and what they're trying to do in Venezuela? How would you react to that concern?
I think with Iran, we have to step back and look at the bigger picture of malfeasance, which is all things Iran. Largest sponsor of state terrorism around the globe. They underwrite instability in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in the Middle East. They've conducted a state-sponsored terrorist attack right here in this hemisphere in Argentina, attempted to kill a former Saudi ambassador to the US within miles of the capital. And we see the long hand of that Iranian malfeasance at work each and every day. And so in my opening remarks mentioned Iran in Venezuela, but we have seen an uptick in Iranian state-sponsored activity and liaison with Venezuela. That has included Quds Force, and it has included other elements of support to the illegitimate Maduro regime cronies. And so what's Iranian interest in Venezuela when they're in fact struggling to take care of their own problems with the COVID outbreak and many other social ills within Iran due to their own state mismanagement. So I think it's to gain positional advantage in our neighborhood in a way that would counter US interests. And so I look at the Iranian interest with concern, and we're tracking that closely and sharing intel with our partners. As per the questions about these tankers that are en route, well, we know that Maduro, through Chavez into Maduro, has wrecked the oil industry in Venezuela, wrecked the industry in Venezuela, and ruined what was once the most prosperous country in South America. Just sent it into a path that's destroyed everything for the Venezuelan people. So I've seen those same news reports that the tankers are en route. I don't comment any further on those news reports, but I view the Iranian activity globally and in Venezuela in specific as a concern.
I don't know, there's a few questions as well regarding the deployment that was announced a month ago of our naval assets, air assets to the Caribbean to counter narcotics trafficking. A lot of questions have to do with, how is there a mission beyond that? How long will they be there? Is it trying to send a message other than counter narcotics? That is the sort of general line of questions that I've seen from some of the questions that have been asked.
Transnational criminal organizations, $90 billion a year industry. These are organizations, in some case, narco-terrorist organizations, as is the designation for ELN and the FARC dissidents in Colombia, that in many cases have more territory, more funds than security institutions they're up against. And this fight didn't start in 1 April when President Trump and the Secretary of Defense announced our enhanced counter-narcotics operation. This fight's been going on for decades, and the United States Southern Command, through our Joint Interagency Task Force South, which is our fighting arm that's a lead for the counter-narcotics fight, we've been after this fight for decades. We've got to put pressure on these organizations, pressure on these networks, financial pressure by disrupting their movements. We put pressure on these networks by working with our partners to help them build strong institutions so that they can get out the source, take away the livelihood of cocaine, coca farming, the labs in Colombia, build capacity of our partner forces like El Salvador, Costa Rica, Panama, so that they can interdict it. It's important to note that last year, 50% of all our interdictions were partner-enabled partner assists. We have 20 one nations working with us in Jayada South. So it's not just the U.S. that feels this threat, it's the hemisphere. And so we're all in, and we've been all in. For a number of years, Southcom commanders, myself included, excuse me, have been vocal about the need for more resources to get after this enemy. And make no mistake about it, these are our enemy. We're killing 70,000 plus people here in the United States and undermining democracy and security, this virtuous circle of our neighborhood. The goodness is being shaken by these organizations. And so we've been making the case, and I pitched in January to Secretary of Defense what I thought we needed. Secretary approved that, and we've moved out. So it had little to do with COVID. COVID added a complexity to how we would deploy, but our partners stepped up by allowing access, and our partners have stepped up despite the COVID environment to get after this enemy. Colombia in particular has kicked off Operation Orion 5, which is a Colombian-led operation. And last year, partners participated in 50% of the interdictions and disruptions. This year, it's up to 75%. So this is all about getting after a persistent threat that began before the current COVID crisis, and it is about putting the right amount of pressure on it so we can crush these threats and disrupt them and deter them and defeat them.
Admiral, there's an interesting question here from one of the participants. He or she asked, how have U.S. military sales to Southern Hemisphere partners compared to Russian and Chinese FMS in the region? How are we doing compared to them in this space of FMS?
There is a significant Russian military sales that in the hemisphere, less Chinese sales. What China has figured out is that the Latin American countries don't always have a lot of cash in their defense budget. Excuse me again here. And so Chinese come through with gifts. And so they gift military equipment, boats, trucks, things of that nature. And now the Chinese gifts and the Russian sales exceed US. That I know. It's hard to get an exact bead on China since it's very opaque and it's always in the form of gifts. But the US equipment is built to last, and it is some of it is the country's purchase. Some of it we bring through our security cooperation programs, where we help to build, just take an example, small boat units for a Central American country with vetted units. These are units you can trust, they're corruption free. And then we bring in the training and the maintenance and teach the nations how to maintain and train, so that ultimately the partner nation can take control of their own program and get after the threats. It's not a high dollar program, but it pays big dividends in the mutual security for the partner nation by crushing these transnational criminal organizations and reducing the impact, the negative impact they have in the U.S. So it's a good question, but Russia and Chinese in that sphere is significant.
So how do we, I mean, you're very clear early on what we need to do, what we are doing, but how do we compete, all right, with the Chinese, particularly Chinese, but also the Russians and others, right? They have more flexibility, right, than we do. We have authorities, we have laws, we have regulations, and so on. So I often say, you've heard me say, I don't know how many times, Admiral, that and in agreement with you that we need to compete in the region. But we don't seem to be able to have whether the tools or the infrastructure to do the way we used to do in the region back, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I often say, the United States built the infrastructure in the region back at the earlier part of the last century. How do we compete in that space in light of the flexibilities they have and those that we don't have?
So I'd use a sports analogy. We compete by ensuring that we are the best at what we do. The United States military is a professional organization. We're not perfect. but we work hard at being professional. And we swear an oath to Constitution and values, and we do professional training, values-based training, human rights-based training. But we've got to ensure that we stay true to that compass no matter whatever happens. And we have, and I'm proud to be a part of an organization that emphasizes that. And then we bring that training to our partners. I haven't met a chief of defense or a minister of defense yet in this job, 18 months in this job, that doesn't want the same ultimate objective for their forces. They want to partner with the U.S., they want to emulate that professionalism, and they don't want to get drawn down a path of human rights violations or elsewhere. So it is really important that we focus on that aspect of competing and maintain that aspect very strong. Then all the training that goes into being a professional. So tactics, planning, how to plan, how to conduct a military operation, and then take that to exercise. So we take the training, it's classroom training, subject matter expert training, seminar kind of training, and we turn it into exercises. And we have a robust exercise program that we exercise in partner nations. We rotate around, that we focus on the kind of threats that impact that nation. So it matters to the nation, matters to the region, that also impact the United States. So one of our big exercises every year is called trade winds. Trade winds are good. Every sailor wants a trade wind. But the flip of trade winds are hurricane force winds, earthquakes, bad things, or a terrorist attack. So packed into that trade winds exercise package is anti-terror, counter-terror training, is explosive ordnance training if you had a bomb and not type of attack, is marksmanship training, basic soldiering and security force skills, hostage rescue training, taking down a threat at sea, it's sharing intelligence. How do you work together? It's a lot of basic blocking and tackling. It's stuff the United States military is good at, but we just don't get good at it by patting ourselves on the back. We work hard at being good at it. And we pack that into our exercises. And exercises, values are our true North Star, but exercises also point us in that direction as well. It's where we bring it all together. That's what we've been focusing on, Frank, those kind of things. And sometimes some construction money, humanitarian assistance money flows in. I could go on and on about the value of those exercise programs. So how do we outcompete China? We outcompete China by ensuring that we remain the best partner, that we bring sufficient resources to our training, our education, our exercises, and our security cooperation programs. You alluded to that, laws and requirements. Hey, I embrace those laws. We're a nation of laws. We need to make sure that we know how to utilize them and we know how to maximize them. We plan ahead, and where necessary, we clear away the underbrush on things that are a little bit cumbersome, and we work through that. I found Congress to be very willing, as well as your former office and Office of Secretary of Defense, to help us clear away that underbrush so we can deliver. Remember, our training, our education, our equipment, our exercise, they're built to last. It's long game kind of things. Sometimes it's not always the less expensive kind of thing, but you get what you pay for, and you're investing in a relationship as well as good gear and good training that's world-class, better than none.
Thank you, Admiral. So we are getting a lot of questions, as you can imagine, on Venezuela. I've asked a couple already, but there are a few related to the, let's call it botched incursion that we saw recently. So I'm just going to give you an open-ended opportunity to address that question or that issue.
United States Southern Command and the U.S. government has no connection to that botched event. Zero. Break. Separate thought. The United States of America and 60-some nations of the world are united behind the absolute necessity to have democratic transition in Venezuela, and the U.S. policy hasn't changed. It's a democratic transition using economic and diplomatic pressure. There's been no change in that policy, and there's been no involvement in this botched event.
I don't know, we're getting also a number of questions from Argentina. A number of folks from Argentina are with us in this conversation. Everything from the engagements or training that you're doing now with the Armed Forces of Argentina. What is your sort of sense of how that relationship is developed, particularly with the armed forces?
So our focus was, and thanks for the question from Argentina. A year ago, in June of last year, I had an excellent visit to Argentina. Spent several days there. Was very impressed with the world-class training that they conduct through their peacekeeping centers and the professionalism of the Argentina military forces, Army, Navy, Air Force is world-renowned and well-known. And so our focus, as it has been and will continue to be, is on the professional institution, is a partnership. So we work hand in hand, and all militaries, professional military security organizations. Now I noticed I said professional, and Argentina is one of them, as are our democratic partners across the hemisphere, work for elected government officials who set policy. And so policy, I always look at policy as the framework in which we all operate. And so we are working forward with the Armed Forces of Argentina as their policy allows. And so far we've had exceptionally a good dialogue with the new Argentina Minister of Defense and the Chief of Defense. So would have probably been able to schedule a trip down in the summer, but I think with the COVID restrictions, all of us are relegated to this type of engagement. Our senior defense official in our embassy in Argentina remains actively involved in working forward to how we can partner with the military forces, and including education, all those elements of a strong partnership that I spoke about in the last answer. So it's a really good question. While I was there last year, I had the opportunity to speak at the War College, and had a great conversation with tough questions. Talked about this circle of vicious threats and how we have to work together to crush that circle, to break that circle. And the only way to do that is working together, really. We've got to be all together on this.
Thank you, Admiral. We are running out of time. So before I give you a few minutes to close.
Frank, I got the little question ticker, so I don't know. I got up to 54. It's going up faster than a.
Yeah, it is. And this is the toughest moderating I have ever done in my life, to sort of try to get these questions. But we do want to give you a few minutes to close. So let me ask you one last question. And again, the Venezuelan questions keep coming. You know, are you concerned at all of any kind of military conflict in the Caribbean? This is a question that keeps coming up from folks in the region as well. I think from the region as well as here in Miami. Are you concerned, or are you simply very focused on the mission deployment that you described very well earlier about the transnational criminal organizations, counter narcotics, et cetera?
So it's a thoughtful question, and one that I'd be happy to talk about all day and answer all day if we had the time. So our focus is on partnerships. So our focus remains with working with great partners like Colombia and Brazil. And how do we strengthen the things that Colombia and Brazil cares about that we care about in the United States? So education, our intelligence sharing, our exercise program, our planning together. And so with respect to Venezuela, from the beginning, year and a half ago and beyond, our focus has been on sharing intelligence, trying to understand what Maduro and his cronies are up to, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what new brutality they have inflicted on their population, and then how I best, as United States Southern Command, support our Secretary of Defense, who works directly for the President, and nest that inside an overall U.S. government approach, and then State Department working that globally. So it's been in support of, and it's been focused on planning and preparation and thinking through the day after. And I do believe there's going to be a day after when a legitimate government is restored. It's too much opportunity in Venezuela to not get there. It just can't happen fast enough for the poor suffering citizens and people of Venezuela who we hear from and meet constantly. So that's been our focus with respect to Venezuela. So talk about that vicious circle of threats. We talked about Russia and Cuba and to a lesser extent China, that they're all working inside Venezuela to counter democracy. And so our focus is not on Russia and Cuba in Venezuela, but it's setting conditions more broadly to see that transition. And in a way, you box Russia and Cuba out and set conditions for true democracy, which is what I think the people want. Separate from that, but in that vicious circle, are these transnational criminal organizations that are eating away at strong institutions globally and particularly in this hemisphere. $90 billion a year. It funds a lot of insurrection. And so that's when our principal counter threat focus. So our strategy is three-pronged. It's focused on our own team, being the best partners. It's focused on building strong partnerships with partner nations and regional security institutions like Caricom Impacts and Sadena and RSS. And it's focused on countering threats. Those threats are transnational criminal organizations. We're getting after that directly by disrupting them and putting pressure on their networks in partnership with other nations and our own US government law enforcement partners. The countering the threat posed to democracy and the hemisphere by these malign actors, that's an indirect approach whereby we're working with our partner nations to ensure they have strong institutions. So it's a thoughtful question, and my answer is trying to explain how our elements of power here at Southcom are linked both with other US government and our partners to ensure that the right thing happens in Venezuela.
Admiral, thank you so much. Let me turn it over to you for some final remarks. I'll say some few remarks as well before turning it over to Brian. Go ahead, Admiral.
Our national defense strategy talks about ensuring that we maintain an advantage in this hemisphere, and the advantage we have are our values and the democracy. And the national defense strategy talks about strengthening our alliances and our partnerships as a principal way to get after that. And our Southcom strategy, when I held up a couple times, nests right into that. And that's what we're working on feverishly. This hemisphere matters. It matters to all of us because it's our neighborhood. And in a neighborhood, the security, good security is a benefit to all of us. And good security starts with good neighbors that value the same thing. I think we have good neighbors here, a lot of cultural and human connections. This hemisphere matters because it's a democratic hemisphere. It's a hemisphere of freedom. And so we are focused deeply and passionately and urgently on ensuring that that hemisphere stays a democratic hemisphere and that those threats to our neighborhood are thwarted and all the good characteristics of that neighborhood are strengthened. So that's what I'd like to leave everybody with and sort of charge the audience here. You're listening for a reason, and you're listening, I think, because the hemisphere matters. So I continue asking those hard questions to challenge assumptions and facts about how we're thinking about it. Write and think deeply, and then act. Join an organization, whether it's a volunteer organization or some non-government organization or a government organization that where good people are doing great work across the hemisphere each day for tomorrow, for the children, for the little boy I met in Costa Rica who had just come off the United States hospital ship Comfort, who was blind and couldn't see, and for the first time ever had received medical care and help by an international team, a team trying to extend a handshake and some comfort. It doesn't all have to be a fist.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral, we had, just to let you know, over 700 folks listening to our discussion either on Facebook or on Zoom. So we really appreciate you coming with us, starting us off on this. I turn it over to my colleague, Brian Fonseca.
Hey, thanks, Frank and President Rosenberg and Dean Stack for everything you're doing for the hemisphere and for students and thinking. It's great to see you this morning.